All right, it's 6 p.m. We'll go ahead and get started. This is our April 3rd, 2023 workshop meeting. Mary Ann, can I get roll call?
Mayor Young.
Here.
Vice Mayor Stone.
Here.
Councilmember DeAndra.
Here.
Councilmember Brandon.
Here. Okay, the first item on the agenda tonight is review and discuss the village-wide undergrounding feasibility assessment. Jeremy?
I think you guys are all aware we've the council did a work authorization for Kimley Horn to provide a village-wide undergrounding feasibility assessment. What you have in front of you or in your packet is the draft of that plan, and Kimley Horn is here to give a presentation on that assessment.
Okay, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to present the results of our feasibility assessment this evening. My name is Kevin Shannon. I was the project manager for this effort. So tonight, what we'll be going over is we're going to start with the data collection that we did. We'll then move into program phasing and duration. We did do an assessment of easement needs as part of the work. We'll then move into our order of magnitude opinion of probable cost. Then wrap up with funding opportunities as well as any next steps should you proceed to or decide to proceed further with the program. So our first order of business for the assessment was to perform some data collection so we could really understand what the extent of the existing utilities were within the village. And so as you would expect, we did find that FPL, AT&T, and Comcast have aerial facilities on the poles. We also found that Verizon has a small amount of aerial infrastructure towards the southeastern limits of the village. There's also 8 other utility owners in the village whose facilities are almost exclusively underground. 4 are fiber optic providers, and there's 4 other government agencies that operate and maintain both water and transportation related infrastructure. We looked at all of these during this assessment because these particular utility owners would have the highest likelihood of having somewhat of a hybrid system where they'd have a lot of underground but potentially also some above ground, so that's why we focused here. There's 2 other utility providers. I haven't put their logos on the screen. They're just both gas companies. They're not going to have anything aerial, so we didn't focus too much on them at this point in the program. They become important towards construction when you have to avoid their facilities, but for right now, we didn't need to pay too much attention. But we do have information on them. We do know where their facilities are. So here is a map of the combined overhead system. This includes infrastructure from FPL, AT&T, Comcast, and Verizon. If there's a red line on this map, it's representing one or more of those utility providers on the poles. Overall, we identified over 22 pole line miles of overhead facilities within the village. So you'll note that you don't see red lines everywhere because some of the communities already have underground systems in their neighborhood, and so we would not have a red line. We did not show any underground facilities. Now, we would leverage and reuse those in a design, but for what we're talking about today, we're only showing the overhead system. And I failed to mention earlier, if at any point during this presentation you have a question and you want to ask me something, just stop me and we can do that before we get all the way to the end and then maybe lose the question. So I want to move now just to program phasing and duration. That was one thing when we had the initial discussions here, we wanted to have just kind of a ballpark understanding of what kind of phasing we would be looking at to underground, upwards of 22 miles of infrastructure. And so based on our experience, we would recommend that a program of this size be broken into 5 or 6 phases. So that would, get you 3 or 4 pole miles or so per phase. Now what that does is it breaks up the program into manageable projects that can then be implemented within a reasonable time frame. We'd expect that a program like that could be completed within 8 to 10 years. That would require that these phases be underway simultaneously. So you'd have multiple phases underway simultaneously. The duration of the program would be a lot longer if you wanted to complete one phase before beginning another one. Most municipalities that have multi-phase programs do that, where they overlap. They're not all starting at the same time, but there's a lag in between them so that certain activities are occurring, such as like heavy, conduit installation, that finishes and they might move to a different phase. Breaking up projects into phases, it mitigates a lot of risk. Those risks can include cost risks, schedule durations, community impact risks. All of those things are mitigated when you break the program into smaller, manageable chunks. So as I mentioned earlier, we would talk about easement needs. So we did do an assessment of what we felt easement needs would look like here in the village. So when we did this, we had a strong bias for placement of the utilities within public right-of-way. Both the FDOT and ADJOURNMENT roadway design criteria govern the placement of utilities within the right-of-way, and there's specific setbacks that we must meet setbacks from the road lanes that we must meet in order to place utilities in the right-of-way. We also need to make sure that that area is clear below grade, so that we can't place new equipment on top of things like water mains or other people's communication infrastructure, gas mains, things like that. In general, it appears that there's more right-of-way width available towards the western side of the village than on the eastern side. So we'd anticipate that easement needs towards the western side of the village would be less than on the east side. On the east side, the right-of-way widths are a bit narrower, and there's infrastructure like sidewalks and stormwater facilities. There's also commercial districts towards the east side of the village, where you have things like on-street parking, and then other just improvements that make placement of utilities within the right-of-way unfeasible. It's not to say that you'd have to place everything in an easement towards the east. We just feel that there's a greater chance that you would need more easement towards the eastern side of the village. There's also, in the pictures that I'm showing there, those are switches. You have a standard switch on the right, and you have what they call a Vista switch on the left. Those pieces of equipment are larger than your standard transformers, and they're a little taller. And we'd also have to evaluate sight triangle and clear sight distances. For example, if someone's pulling out of their driveway or they're coming up to an intersection, the equipment has to be set back far enough such that when they're trying to make that turn, they can see vehicles coming from either direction. That causes us to push the equipment back because these are over the height. There's a 30-inch maximum height of things that can be in the sight triangle, so that pushes it back, and if we run out of right-of-way, we have to get an easement. So that leads me to the order of magnitude of our opinion of probable cost. I'll go over some of the elements that we were considering as we developed this. So first, we assembled data relative to historical project costs, and then we reviewed the infrastructure maps that were provided by the utility providers in order to develop gross quantities for the program. We used recent cost information from similar projects. These are bid prices for overhead utility conversion projects that are currently underway or were already completed in similar local coastal communities. We used comprehensive construction costs, and what I mean by that is final bid prices that we have for similar projects that are inclusive of pretty much all the elements that you need to do in order to implement a program. And then, so we take those and then we apply them to the gross quantities to allow many of the smaller scale costs to be captured. Some of the small scale costs might be overlooked in a high level planning study like this, but when we do it like this and we combine things, we're able to capture those hidden costs. And you may have gotten some ballpark estimates from other utility owners in the past to kind of give you parts and pieces of an idea, but a lot of times those ballparks are qualified and missing a lot of scope that you would need to implement in order to fully do a program. It's not to say that the ballpark costs were bad, it's just they're not inclusive of everything that you need to do, and that's what we're trying to capture here in this assessment. We also use the consistent unit cost application methodology. It's not really reasonable to perform a real detailed design of what the new system would look like for the entire program. And so, you know, we're using bid prices from similar projects to create unit prices for two different types of areas here in the village. You have residential and commercial areas. The unit prices that we develop for both residential and commercial are then applied over those zoning districts. Commercial costs are generally higher than residential costs because the commercial loads are higher, the equipment needs are higher, and the built environment in a commercial area is just a little bit different, and it's a little bit more difficult to restore than, you know, you're looking at concrete and asphalt restoration versus just grass, you know, typical in residential. So I want to go over a few observations and recommendations that we're making in our assessment. When we set out on this, you had noted that the municipal boundaries of the village were rather irregular, and you were concerned that it might create areas or pockets of areas where if we left the aerial lines, there would be less reliability for residents of the village. And so we went around and we looked at a whole bunch of these areas to determine, are there areas that in Palm Beach County or Martin County or Jupiter that we should convert in order to provide greater reliability to Cuesta, or should we exclude areas, both either out, you know, those pockets that we talked about of unincorporated Palm Beach County, or were there even some areas within Cuesta that we might recommend that are to be excluded from the program. So we did review all those boundaries, and we've made some recommendations that I'm going to go over here in just a minute. As we reviewed the maps, we didn't really find any significant areas outside the limits of the municipal boundary of Tequesta that we would recommend for inclusion in the program. I'd say the only area is the one that's pictured there in the blue circle that I'm going to go over in a minute. It's good. It's a good thing because that reduces, you know, your overall cost of the program. So there are a couple areas that I do note in the report that I'd like to talk about, and there are two areas near the northern end of Seabrook that are technically in unincorporated Palm Beach County that we would recommend for conversion, and this is Wingo Street and Russell Street on the east side of Seabrook, and then also Wingo Street and the south side of Robert Street on the west side of Seabrook. If you look at the graphic that I've got shown here, you'll see, like, within the blue circle there, we have a main line that's serving homes at the very ends of those streets, and you've got to be able to pass through Palm Beach County in order to get to those homes to serve them. And so since we're talking about residents and property owners in the village of Tequesta, we recommend that we do include that portion of unincorporated Palm Beach County within your program so that you're capturing those property owners in the village. So now I'll move into areas that we are recommending for exclusion from the program. So the first one is Bermuda Terrace. I don't have a graphic for that, but you know, it's a large area. But when we looked at it, and we got the data from both the electric and the communication providers, there's really no impact on the reliability of Tequesta's system by keeping Bermuda Terrace completely aerial. So there's no good reason to spend that money. Rio Vista Drive is similar. It's pretty much a peninsula, you know, of unincorporated Palm Beach County. It's a dead-end circuit, so leaving that area really doesn't do anything to the reliability of Tequesta. Third is County Line Road. County Line Road has a significant pole line east-west on the north side of the right-of-way there. Those poles have been hardened, and they're technically, I think, already just in Martin County. And so for that reason, we're recommending that pole run stay aerial. When we talk about north of Dover Road and west of Garden Street, this one is a run that it serves homes both in, and that's where on the graphic to the right, the L-shaped blue highlight, that's that particular pole run. The homes that are in Tequesta along Dover would ultimately end up being served by a brand new underground system. And so, and that would go down Dover. Then however, there are poles in the backyards of those homes along Dover and along Garden Street there. And those poles serve both Tequesta and unincorporated Palm Beach County. I think that's Riverside. Yeah, Riverside Pines is the neighborhood there. And so even though that the Tequesta property owners would get brand new service from the underground system, we have to keep those poles up in order to continue serving the Riverside Pines neighborhood. So in order to get rid of that particular pole line, you'd have to go in both areas of Riverside Pines, you'd have to convert, which seems a bit unreasonable just for that one segment of poles when your residents are getting the full reliability benefits from a brand new underground system in the front. So that's why we recommend that particular L-shaped pole line stay aerial. There's also a small segment of aerial lines along Riverside Drive, and you can see that in that blue circle. That both Riverside Oaks and Tequesta Pines on either side of the street there, they already have underground infrastructure, so the benefits gained from just doing that small piece of aerial infrastructure in unincorporated Palm Beach County, it wouldn't really provide a ton of benefit within that for those two communities. So with that small segment, we'd recommend leaving it aerial. Now, I do have costs applied to all of these so that you could pick and choose. You know, if any of these, you felt strongly about any of them, we could include them in the program. Coral Cove Park, that's another place where we would recommend not converting. That's on the barrier island. Converting that small segment of overhead would provide some marginal aesthetic value, but there really wouldn't be that much of a reliability benefit to any of the residents in Tequesta. And then finally, we have the US 1 corridor. It's largely commercial corridor. And in discussions with village staff, we just elected to exclude that from the base program at this point. We do have a cost developed for it. It's fairly expensive, and it's largely driven by the need for easements, property restorations, and having to reimburse FPL for the undepreciated cost of all the brand new hardened infrastructure that they're recently installed or are still installing along US 1. So, as I said before, I've got costs assigned to all of these. You could choose to convert any of these and add it into the program. These are just some areas that we felt, in our opinion, might be ones that you would want to consider excluding. But that you can make whatever decision you would like on any of those. We also excluded transmission lines from the program. They're extraordinarily problematic to convert underground. Easement needs are pretty extreme. The cost is about $25 million a mile to be able to convert them. And so for that reason, they're largely along the railroad right away on Old Dixie. So we chose to exclude them for the program. I do also want, now that I've gotten past all of our exclusions, I'll talk a little bit about inflation. What we had put together did consider inflation. So 2021 and 2022 were truly historic in terms of observed inflation. But we've not seen any economic forecasts that are predicting the same levels of inflation from 2022 projecting into 2023. The latest forecast that I saw was from Kiplinger's. They forecast 3.2% inflation in 2023 by the end of the year. And so we looked at that, and we looked at inflation between 1990 and 2022. The average of those 32 years was around 3.1-ish%. And so with 3.2, 3.1, it was relatively similar, so we just applied 3.2% for the duration of the 8 to 10 year duration that we would anticipate this program. We felt like that was a reasonable assumption. But again, that's just an assumption. You know, that's subject to discussion. So when you take all the unit costs and all the quantities, we get a base opinion of cost of $78.3 million in present day value. We then applied a range of contingency from 0 to 25%, which would be reasonable at this level of study. And then we applied inflation impacts across that range. So that yields a total impact of, or total opinion of program cost in the range of $90 to $112 million. Lots of assumptions and qualifications that go into that opinion. I know you have the draft assessment in all of your packages. All of those are fully defined in there. You know, feel free to ask me any questions that you may have on any of those assumptions. But I'm not going to go over them all, and just for the sake of time in our presentation tonight. Here's a summary of those alternative items that we had recommended for exclusion from the program. We applied costs to pretty much all of them. They're not necessarily meant to be added all together, but you know, we put a summary at the bottom there, close to $19 million. Now, one thing that these don't include right now is inflation, because should you choose to convert any one of these options, we'd have to look at the phasing and the sequencing of that, and at what year would this happen? Because you want to do this in an adjacent phase so that it made good financial sense and it was efficient. And so we'd have to figure out what the sequencing of the phases was, what year that would happen, and then we would know how many years out we were. Then we could apply that level of inflation 3, 4, 5, 8 years from now of when that was going to happen. And so then we would have another column. So it's a minimum of the cost you see in the total column plus inflation. So now let's talk about a little bit about funding and cost reduction opportunities for programs such as this. Our assessment included a matrix of grant opportunities and grant and funding opportunities. I shouldn't call them just grants because there was appropriations and loans and other things in there as well. So what we have in the matrix, they range from federally funded grants, state, local type grants, low-cost loans, all the way into state and federal level appropriations. The details of all those funding opportunities are all included in the assessment package that you have. There's also cost-sharing opportunities between other capital programs. For example, on past projects with other municipal clients, we've shared restoration costs from undergrounding with water, sewer, and gas work being performed by other utility owners. So for example, if a gas line was being replaced down a street and there was paving impacts and you had undergrounding on that same street and there was also paving impacts, you could split the paving costs 50-50 on the road restoration. I've seen municipalities do that with the utility owners feeling good about the municipality controlling the paving and just cutting them a check for half the cost. There's other ways to reduce the overall cost of the program by just changing goals and objectives. When we went through this assessment, we're trying to get to a point where we're undergrounding everything as much as possible. I know I've got some exclusions that I just went over, but we're trying to underground to the greatest extent practical. Now, there can be discussion about, do we change program goals to reduce the cost? That could be, well, anywhere that there's hardened feedered infrastructure that's brand new that FPL just put in, that's very expensive to convert that. You could leave that aerial and underground only the laterals that are what you would normally see in someone's backyard. That'd be an example of a revised program goal that could reduce the cost of the overall program. So just briefly, just a couple next steps to discuss should you wish to continue exploring an underground program. Exploring financing and funding options is pretty important so that you can better understand what your debt service would be and debt obligations, what those costs would be to borrow the money so that to be able to get the program implemented. That feeds into assessment methodology, so specific property owners can get a good understanding of what their payment obligations would be should you choose to assess property owners as part of a conversion process. There's also master planning of the program that would define specific phases, the order at which those phases would be constructed, and that allows the program costs to be very, very defined. So you would know how much, here's a phase, here's how much it's anticipated to cost, what year it happens, and so then you can start to do a cash flow model. If you're going to do bonds and you wanted to do several tranches, you would know how large the bonds needed to be and at what time they needed to be issued. Master planning also explores things like traffic impacts, risk identification and mitigation strategies, selection of a program delivery method, public outreach to both inform and educate residents and business owners about the program. So lots of other things to come should you wish to continue. And that brings me pretty much to the end of my presentation. I appreciate everyone's time tonight, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
Council?
Kevin, when it comes to, as you indicated, there's a lot of funding alternatives that are listed here. Are they mutually exclusive? In other words, if you apply under one, and, well, let me rephrase the question. First of all, what are the chances of succeeding with any one of these, number one? Number two, can you apply to more than one so that you can see funds maybe from both a state and a federal basis? Because obviously the costs that you've generated here for this project, I was surprised at. I didn't expect to see them come in that high. So this is going to be a cost-driven decision, and I don't believe the village has the current financial wherewithal to support this unless we were to receive very significant funding from either federal or state sources.
The answer to the question is, are like the grants and the funding, is it stackable? Yes. You can apply for multiple different types of grants. As far as chances, anything that's in the matrix you qualify for. So you'd have a chance. We wouldn't have shown anything to you that you just weren't eligible for, either by demographics or anything like that. We wouldn't have put anything like that on the list.
And I understand that part of it, but then again, if you're eligible for it, others are as well.
Yeah,
so.
some programs are far more competitive than others. When you get into the federal grants, the dollars are much higher, but the pool of applicants is also much greater. And the requirements get a lot stricter. I know that the HMGP process from a couple of years ago had a pretty lax benefit cost analysis to be able to show that your program was cost effective. The federal government, FEMA, recently changed the rules around the benefit cost analysis, which has made it exceedingly difficult, mostly because it's been hard to get very specific cost information from the utility owners to feed into that benefit cost analysis. And the last I'll be quite frank, the last round of BRIC grant, the BRIC grants applications from municipalities all over the state was rough. Only one of them was funded that I know of, and they were also the owner of the electric utility. And so they provided a lot of that detailed information it's the other municipalities who were not electric utility owners were not able to get.
Okay, well, thank you. That was a lot of information, which I think a lot of us were hoping to get, because we always get questions from residents. The map that you had with the lines highlighted where the above ground lines are currently, I love that map. I love visuals. I think that definitely highlights how much we have that we would have to cover. Are we confident in that map? As far as the areas that you had on another slide that don't affect Tequesta areas, such as the north side of Dover and Garden Street. So are we absolutely confident on that?
When you say, am I confident on this is where we have overhead facilities, or am I confident that we would not be able to convert, or we should?
That one.
Okay.
Yeah, so that second slide where you have even on Riverside Drive, there's a little sliver.
Mm-hmm.
are we really, that wouldn't really make feasible sense to do those?
Yeah,
Are we
I'm
confident in that
yeah,
recommendation?
yeah. I'm confident that it would you could do it, but if you were doing it, you would be doing it more for aesthetics than you would be for reliability
Okay,
at that
I just want to
point.
make sure we're
Yeah.
really 100% on that.
Yeah,
when you guys
yeah.
put your stuff together. Okay. The other question, when we look at different areas of Tequesta, I know this whole thing is put together as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
What if one area, say one community, gets together? Let's say this community over here says, no, thank you. But this one over here, all the residents get together and say, yeah, we want this. Council, tell us what we need to do to help pay for it for our area. Is it possible to do those areas?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That would be an example of a revised program goal. If you want to just scale it back to neighborhood projects, that happens very commonly.
So would we have to go forward with the master plan to get that?
No. And when you start getting down into just a couple streets here and there,
Yeah.
that's just the project. There's no
Okay.
master planning to be done at that
I'm
point.
just trying to think. I know there's some areas where residents have asked for it in the past. I just don't think the whole village might want it, but I have a feeling it's possible a area might want it.
Yeah, we've been involved in projects where, say, 2 streets had approached the municipality and said, hey, we want to do this, and then they'll set up a district,
Okay.
a special assessment district for just those 2 streets, and then they fund the program like that. We've done projects where there's streetscape improvements, and the undergrounding is just involved within that streetscape improvement. That's normally more commercial, and then that commercial district through like a business owners association, they've set up their own
Sure.
taxing districts to fund. Or the municipality can decide that, they create a capital program to do it. There's a lot of different ways to go about that. I see more special assessment than I do capital improvement, unless it was like a truly a government sponsored, type redevelopment project or something like
Okay.
that.
I might be coming back with asking what it would be for each piece. That's it. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you have that information now?
When you say each piece, it's hard to do, because that could be anything.
I know, and I know some of our communities are broken up. They pull from a main power source, so like one of our larger communities, when you look at it, you think of it as one, but FPNL sees it as 3 different pieces.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I just wanted to know if there was the option, if we get approached by residents, if one part is gung-ho about it, but the other part isn't, if we have the option to at least serve some of our residents.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's fine.
there's certainly you can cut these projects however you'd like.
Okay. As long as the option's there.
Yeah, the
That's what I was
option,
looking for.
yeah,
Okay.
anything's possible. Sometimes where you make the cuts can be more difficult to implement than others, and it might behoove you to either extend or reduce, the limit, just to, make it a little bit easier on the infrastructure change. Because you can extend it out a little bit more, and your costs go up like way high for is seemingly a small little bit, and that's just the way the grid is lined up. But you can slice and dice however you'd like.
Okay.
To follow up on what you just said, though, and the question that Lori's asking, you could extend it and that could drive your costs higher. When you cut it up, does that also have the potential effect of driving cost up? Because you're losing the efficiency, perhaps, of attacking a geographic area that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There is some economies of scale in these. And when you're looking at a whole area, and the way when we start going through master planning, or the way we would recommend how to cut between phases, we're looking at the grid to do that. There's some real technical reasons why you would want to, stop at this point rather than a block away over here at this point. You're looking at the grid, you're looking at how it's set up. You're trying to find the most cost-efficient way to draw your project boundaries to minimize, the costs of all the fringe improvements that need to be made to convert a smaller area.
So in making the determination with respect to funding, is it a situation where we can apply for the funding and wait and see what happens before we absolutely commit to a project, or do we have to commit to the project in order to apply and be eligible to apply for the funding?
It really depends on the specific funding that you're pursuing. I know, like with FEMA, and these programs are all in the spirit of resiliency. They really like to see their applicants be fully committed to the project. That they're not completely dependent on federal money. That they're going to move forward with this one way or the other. They want to see a commitment. Other grants, it just really depends on the source. So it's kind of a mixed bag.
Okay.
Do you have anything else to say?
I was gonna say, it makes for a good, healthy discussion. Appreciate all the information. I think it's well done. I still think we should try to continue to move forward in some aspect or another, just to get some of the ball rolling.
Thank you for the assessment. It was extremely thorough. I think it answered every single question, so great job. So with the funding, I had some of the same questions. Can it maybe be identified which funds we could apply for at the level we're at now? So that gives us some more information, knowing what our parameters, okay, we don't want to commit, but maybe we could try to submit for some funding. What out of the matrix, where we're at now, what ones could we apply for?
Standing here right now, I think anything having to do with the planning side, not the building side, those are ones that you absolutely could apply for now. The closer you get to construction funding, the more developed the agency wants to see a project. Just an example of some of the information that like a FEMA grant is asking for. They want to know, between, affected customers, how many linear feet of conduit are you installing? Where is it going? What are they want to see all that kind of information. And the only way we've been able to provide that in the past is by having, relatively, 60, 75% developed construction plans that we can provide them exhibits so that they can feel good about evaluating what it is they're actually paying for.
So, except for planning, we need to have the project design at some sort of level to apply.
You don't have to have it finished, but you have to be kind of
60%.
underway. Yeah.
And then I know we've talked about public outreach a lot, and that's one of the reasons we did this, because we couldn't reach out to the public. And then my understanding is we really have to go to the master plan before we could do public outreach. So is there any way to do any kind of public outreach like Councilmember Brandon was suggesting, see if certain areas put this information from, see if certain areas are interested, others that aren't, or are we still at a stage where it's too early and we need to go through the master plan to do that?
No, you can decouple public outreach from any kind of master planning process. It's just a matter of what is it that you're looking to either understand from the community or what is it that you want to educate the community on. So you'd kind of tailor an outreach program based on wherever you were in the process. What was it that you were trying to describe to your residents and business owners? What is it that you want to get from them and understand from them as far as what their passions are, what their goals are, what they'd like to see out of a program. So I think that within a master planning process, if you had a coupled public outreach, you're marching down a road towards this larger program. So you're educating about that. You're talking about what people's assessments could look like. You're answering a lot of questions about reliability, safety, aesthetic benefits that they'd be getting. So some bit of that would be in a more of a smaller scale program, but it really just depends on right now. The assessment could certainly be placed on the village's website for everyone to see and consume. But when it comes down to specific neighborhoods, it really just depends on where your head's at and where you want to go. And we just tailor a program around that.
And then one of the alternative programs, I did like the suggestion of leaving the newly hardened structure intact, because it is, you noted, it is a lot more expensive to underground that. And I remember reading articles, I think even on FPL's website, how successful the hardened structure was, above ground hardened structure was on the West Coast. during Hurricane Ian. So that might be something else we could consider. Do you have any idea the reduction of cost that would be if we went that route?
Yeah, I have that dollar amount. I'd have to go back because I don't have that number in my back pocket with me here tonight. But we did quantify hardened versus unhardened. So I could tell you, I'd have to follow up with a kind of a gross amount of what that would be.
Okay, if you could send that to Jeremy, I think that would
Yeah.
be helpful.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a follow-up to
Yep.
that point.
Go ahead.
Obviously, from FP&L's perspective, it's great if the residents and the municipalities take on these costs. Right now, obviously, the cost of hardening, the cost of repairing services when storms hit, obviously it gets passed to all of us through their rates, but
Yep.
right now, they bear that cost up front.
Yep.
If an entity, a municipality undertakes a project like this, it should have the potential to save FP&L, obviously, money. How do we capture that? I mean, do we capture, we can't affect rates just within this particular area, I don't believe. So is there some way to go to FP&L and say, no, wait a minute, if we're gonna undertake this, and this is gonna save you a certain amount of money over a period of time, is there some way of saying to FP&L, you need to be pitching into this as well?
And they do. They have a mechanism for that. They're regulated by the Public Service Commission. And so previously, up until the beginning of 2022, they had the government adjustment factor, which was the 25% discount that I'm sure you've all heard about in the past, where you would get a 25% discount on the labor and materials that FPL would have to expend if they were to do that job on their own. That GAF waiver was eliminated in 2022 in favor of an avoided storm recovery cost. And so what they do is on the binding cost estimates that you get, once you get to the end of the design, the FPL will give you a binding cost estimate. And they offer a credit. That credit's about $314,000 and change per mile of overhead that they discount off of the cost for them to provide you all the materials and their own labor for the things that they do within a conversion program. So that's how they're capturing that benefit that they get for you undertaking a program.
Okay.
And that's FPL. The communications providers, they don't have any such discount or anything like that. We've negotiated with them a million different ways, and they're not willing to provide really anything. They're willing to participate.
They're
but
happy to piggyback on.
Yeah, they're happy to play, but they're not so happy to pay.
Okay.
Do you have that discount in your quote?
Yes.
So that's.
Yeah, we built that in under the new, it's a combination of an operational credit that you get, and then the avoided storm recovery cost, and yeah, that's built in.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, all right, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Open up to public comment. Any public comment? Marcia?
How many, do you know how many homes are on Russell and Ringo or not?
Homes in terms of let me go back to that
On
slide.
that, yeah,
In-
the Wingo Street.
So there's more homes in Palm Beach County than there are in Tequesta on those streets, and so if you got into final design, there's a couple ways to do this. We could run express lines from the street down to the end. We would need ground level transformers because the distance is too far from Seabrook to just be able to serve them from Seabrook. But we could run express down the street to get to them without having to convert each and every home in Palm Beach County. But to answer your question, how many homes are in Tequesta, just looking at the map right there, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it looks about 15 to 20.
Yeah, because the village we're only at the very ends of those streets.
Right. Yeah, and that's what we were recognizing.
Yeah, it's like 2 or 3 at the very end of each of those
Yeah,
streets that are
it doesn't work.
Pines. Okay, thank
Yep. No, you're right. Yeah, you can see how the lines, like anything north of the big black line, that's Palm Beach County, and you can just see those houses on the east and west sides that are just captured into captured into Tequesta. You're welcome.
One more question.
Sure.
You mentioned reliability a couple times, specifically, there was enough reliability with Reorganization Terrace that they wouldn't benefit from underground. And also you said something about the lines going up Riverside that go into Tequesta Pines because they're already underground.
Mm-hmm.
We were doing that. Does that suggest you may have the reliability across the whole village and say, okay, you know, with doing these 3 areas will get us 80% improvement in reliability versus the whole thing going back to the scope of the whole, you know, reduce the scope of the project, keep the cost down.
And sir, real quick, can you state your name for the record?
Oh, sure. Marco Valdez.
Thank you.
So it's true that hardening infrastructure does increase reliability of that particular circuit. Most of the lines that we're talking about beyond anything that's been hardened in Tequesta are just your regular residential laterals. Those are not hardened. And so even though you have reliability benefits because your main feeder is much less likely to go down, if you have any impacts on the lateral lines behind the homes, you're out of service, you know. So from the perspective of, you know, if we go to the smaller line, if memory serves me, that particular segment has concrete poles. It's hardened already up there on Riverside. And so if we did convert that, there'd be a small amount of reliability gain in comparison to, you know, converting an unhardened piece of infrastructure. You'd see a much greater level of reliability gain by converting everything underground than you know, if we left the feeders aerial and then just undergrounded laterals. You'd get a lot. It'd be a lot better than it is today, but it wouldn't be as good as doing everything. It's a compromise. It's
Maybe at the right price point.
right. So yeah, revised program goals. But to answer your question about like percentage-wise, like what that would mean to reliability, I couldn't answer that. I mean, that's a complicated question where you'd have to really look at what the parameters around reliability. There's a lot of key performance indicators that FPL measures themselves by, and they have to submit to the PSC every year. And they'd have to pull that data specific for this area to really kind of be able to apply, like, well, here's our statewide average for reliability gains in hardened infrastructure. Here's where you are right now, but they don't submit. Like, I can't see that. I can't see what the key performance indicators are for this small of an area. I can only see it over the whole service area.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So his question just spurred another question for me. If we were to undertake this, and we were to harden the areas that have been recommended, the fact that you now have, let's say, the majority of this village in a hardened state, if the areas that are not go down, does that change the time frame or the prioritization to get those people back up? In other words, would it mean that they might have to wait even longer because now you've got an area that's pretty much intact, but you've got all these little outlying pockets? Does that put them at a disadvantage relative to where they are today if we were to have an event that would provide some incentive for them to want to come on board?
So let me make sure I understand your question. So you're saying that if you converted, let's say, all the residential laterals in the village and the feeder infrastructure was maintained aerially, if there was a problem in any of those areas that were converted after an event, would
the areas that were not converted
were not converted? Okay, so we're still
greater risk in terms of restoration of power because the bulk of the area is solid. But now you've got some maybe pockets that have been affected, but they're relatively small, relatively small to the whole village. So are they now at a disadvantage in terms of restoration of power?
It maybe, because, and I'll say maybe because it really depends on what's going on in the entire area, how many customers are impacted, because when FPL, AT&T, Comcast, when they're looking to do restoration, they want to make the repairs that get the most customers back online as soon as possible. Right. And so they prioritize those major repairs that get the most people up. So, you know, if you're in a community that's out with 500 customers and all they have to do is go, you know, restore a switch out in the front near the gate, they're going to go do that to get 500 people on. If you're at the end of Russell Street and there's 2 of you that are out, you're probably going to be waiting a little while.
Or some of these other pockets. Okay, so that answers that question.
Yeah.
Okay, any other public comment?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Rick Sartori, 515 North Dover Road. Glad that we have the ability to discuss this. The one thing where my mind goes in this is the total cost and how that breaks down to on a dwelling unit cost. You know, the math in my head was, you know, $118 million or $112 million using 3,000 dwelling units as a number, which is probably very high because there's a lot of pockets. That's over a 10-year repayment. That's almost $38,000 per household or per dwelling unit, about $4,000 a year. So I know that that's all on the forefront of our minds, but I don't know to date what type of conversation on a per unit or per household is. But I know that if you just look at our maps, you have the east side of the river is going to be more impacted, I think, by that. Just the age and the demographics of the people, the value of the homes. I think as we go looking through that, in a few weeks when I'll be up there, that'll be what I'll be looking at as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. And Kevin, I believe we would have to go to the next step of the master plan for you to break down. I know you look into the financials a little more with the master plan.
Yeah, the master plan refines the cost per phases, but to figure out like what a property owner, you know, that is the assessment methodology, and that wouldn't be us. That would be a municipal financial consultant that prepares those, and they'll look at various methodologies, and it's not always by, you know, property value or size of the property. They look at your benefits that you would get from both a safety, reliability, and aesthetics, and they'd apply credits, you know, so for example, if you had a property and you had electric lines on one side of your property, let's just say you'll have one benefit credit for aesthetics when that goes away. But if you're on a corner lot and you had 2 sets of lines on 2 of your property lines, you might get 2 benefit credits. So the more benefit credits that get assigned to your property, the more you'd be, you know, be assessed essentially. The way that they do it, they try to create a very fair comparison, a very fair way of assessing people based on the amount of benefit that they receive.
And I know that was one of the costs I think, listed that you didn't have in there was appropriate consultant or staff member to do the finance. I think you also there was a couple items listed. One was for someone from the village staff to manage a project. So I don't know if that's something. I think some of those costs that you listed that you didn't have weren't significant compared to the very large number we're looking at, but it might still be good for staff to go through those. If council agrees to let us know what some of the costs that weren't included in here that we would for sure need, give us kind of an estimate on that. Could help the conversation too.
So, you know, for tonight's conversation, it's, you know, our next step for us is to accept the plan through council at the next meeting or next time we can get that up. I will say that we have applied for a grant with Kimley Horn as a grant writer to try to get a planning grant. So that was really the next phase in that. You know, as we talk about that master plan, we make that decision if we're going to move forward master plan based on the decision on if we get that grant or not. $150,000 give or take is what it's going to cost, so the 50-50 matching grant would go a long way. The other part of it is the assessment methodology, whether we want to piece out, you know, an area of the Tequesta, you know, whether it's, you know, $10 million, the next step we'd have to get an assessment methodology to break it down with all of that. You know, you could be as simple as charging every property the same amount of money and break it across, or you can do ERUs. I mean, you can do based on the assessed value. I mean, like he was saying, from my conversation with Rob Ory, you know, I mean, it's a lot. I mean, so there's gonna be an RFQ process probably for that, to do an assessment methodology for that. So to give you a cost, I can't get that until we would do an RFQ. So there's several different steps that we still need to get through to get to that stage. I mean, for you guys to go talk to, and I'll just use the country club. If you guys go talk to the country club, like, you still don't know what each property owner is going to be paying for something like that. And we threw out numbers like 38,000, 4,000, but you know, some of the property owners might be paying, you know, 10, and some might be paying 2. It just depends on the, you know, how we break down that methodology. So there's really no, at this point, I don't feel like there's a, you know, you guys can still give that answer to those folks that say, how much is it going to cost? You know, so I hate to muddy up the waters. This was the first step, but then gives us a good idea, but the methodology is still a big step for us. And so if we can have that discussion at a future workshop if that's our next step. I know that was part of our strategic plan, but so I'm teed up for that conversation when we're ready.
Right.
And methodologies can also be applied to smaller projects too. So once you have that assessment methodology, you can use it for small jobs, big jobs, whatever.
So, yeah, approving this plan at the next council meeting is obviously a next step. I mean, Councilmember Brandon brought up a point. Do we want to garner any interest? I know, and that's why I brought up, we have been talking, this is a first step to get to the next step, to then do good public outreach and have more answers. So I guess as a council, we need to decide if we even want to proceed at that point, or if we want to come up with some kind of public outreach to just garner interest and be very clear, you know, this is what we have. We do not have individual costs for individual areas or households, but we are just trying to garner the interest for community-wide. I think it was a survey question, but it was very generic. Was it a survey question?
I think it was something, you want the village to focus on the next couple of years, and I think undergrounding was one of them. I'd have to go back and look at the survey. I don't think it was the highest rated one. I don't think it fell high on the category, but I'd have to look at it again.
And I'm sorry, is there any more public comment? Okay. So council, what do you think next steps are? 'Cause we know we're gonna adopt this, well, I'm not gonna say we know, we're gonna vote next council meeting to adopt the plan or not. But I think tonight we can, unless we wanna talk about it, think about some more and talk about it at the council meeting.
Yeah, I think garnering public interest is an interesting exercise because we've asked a host of questions this evening, right? And so you can expect that people in the public are gonna ask a host of questions. And so it depends on what you're asking them to respond to. If you're asking them to respond to the general concept with a lot more information to come forward, that's one thing. If we want to give them a little more meat on the bone, to give them a little better idea what this might look like, and have them respond on a more, you know, reasoned and considered basis, that's another. But I agree with you. I think moving to vote on the plan is one thing. Moving to try and get the funding necessary to take the next steps, which Jeremy, you said you've already applied for that funding for a grant. And then I think it's just a matter of, I mean, again, these are open meetings for anybody to attend. They're open meetings for everybody to hear. People can come back and look at this. So I guess before we go out and make a formal request to people, it's just how much information do we want to be able to provide to them, and what level of questioning should we be able to address? I think that, I don't know that I would have a good feel for that until we hopefully get this grant and take this next step.
Councilman Brannon?
Yeah. You know, I know the answer I get asked and public comment was made was we have such a variety of demographic and it always comes down to money. And we've also had public comment in the past. Who is it that wants it? There is certain areas that have expressed in the past, but there has been some changeover from home sales. So I think we're kind of not starting over, but we do have to start putting it out there. I would like to move forward though. I'm not saying go for it and spend 100 and whatever million. We definitely need funding, but I think it's good for our infrastructure because for me, it isn't just about aesthetics. It is a safety concern. Physically, we have videos of power poles on fire and lines falling down in properties and whatnot. And instead of FP&L coming in and hardening those poles, and then we're stuck with them for another 30-something years, I would like to move forward with improving our infrastructure.
Okay, yeah, and
Public outreach, I think the sooner the better, even if we put out the backup that was for today and just clearly state, this is what we have so far. Putting in how many households we have in the village, so people can start doing the math and just start getting on their brain, because I think when they see that top number, I think a lot of people would say, yes, I want it, but then they go, oh, whoa, that's a lot. So I think we just need to start getting our residents openly to start thinking about it in an honest, transparent manner, and then let them come to us and tell us, and have them email us, tell us what they want.
Well, that's why I think you gotta be careful you're not premature, because, you know, Rick, you came up here and said, hey, so many households, such and such cost, right? But we would be doing assessments, so for example, the Pines, who have already underground, they won't be part of that, because they've already done it. So this is for the areas that haven't done it yet.
Yeah, that's why I love that map with the lineage on it.
And so you gotta be careful about putting a number.
Well, I think we can't say that the Pines won't be part of it, because we have talked about, if, say we do assessments, theirs would be substantially less, but they would still have to pick up
Okay.
some of the cost outside.
If there's things that are generally shared
Yeah.
costs, okay, I agree.
So you just
but
have to be
think-
careful.
I think Marcia's point was, fundamentally, we've already done it, and we shouldn't be paying a cost equivalent to others who are not in that same situation. But I think the danger is, again, people looking at the costs and saying, well, wait a minute, because that's, we talked about all these funding opportunities. And, you know, the question is, can we stack? We can stack. We know which things we might be able to apply for. All that, you know, again, those are questions we were asking. Those are questions that people from the outside are gonna ask. And are we prepared to be able to address these in a Q&A format? So if we're gonna go out with public outreach, you gotta really think through that Q&A and anticipate what the questions are gonna be, and have, you know, logical, reasoned responses back. And even if it's something to be determined, okay, so here's where we are, this is what we're working on, you know, the end result, we don't know that yet, but here's what we're hoping to achieve. Again, if you go out there prematurely and you don't give them enough information, the initial response is probably gonna be to say no.
Right, and that's why we're on this path, and I've stated from the start, I understand that we're gonna have to spend some money up front to get to a position where we can have educated conversations and, with the public. So, the next step, I know, sorry, Jeremy, can we recap that again? I know this will be on the next council meeting. I know when do we hear about the funding?
So the grant application, I think they actually pushed that back. I think they told me end of April, May, so we wouldn't probably hear until June-ish, June, July, if we get accepted for that grant. So that would be when we really start making that decision point on master planning or not.
And refresh my memory, is that for like the actual engineering and the drawings, or would that cover the next master plan step that Kimley Horn would be involved with?
It's just the master planning, the construction documents are a whole.
Okay,
the
so this
next
is just the
step
master
after
planning,
that.
okay. All right,
Yep, no, I would agree. I think it's a long-term process. If you gave them a green light today, it'd be over 10 years before you even got completed. So, you know, the funding sources are many, many years of opportunities for grants, and different hurricanes will come, will open up more granting opportunities
it'll change,
in
yeah.
that 10-year period of time. So this is definitely a 20-year plus project at the rate that we do things, and that's not a bad thing.
And if you ask people this question after Hurricane Francis, when it took 3 weeks to get power restored in this
Could have been
area, you know, you probably get a different response than you would today, where we haven't had that kind of disruption for the last 12, 13 years. So,
Okay, all right, with that, I'm gonna move on to the next agenda item. Agenda item 2, discussion and direction on the draft for our 23-24 strategic plan. Jeremy?
So February 7th, we had a strategic planning workshop, and developed a strategic plan for the year. This one differs a little bit from the past 2 years that we did this, in that we prioritize these items. And so on your strategic plan that you have in your backup, it's formatted a little different, but you have the highest priority objectives that the council had voted on, put together. We rank these, and then you have the priority objectives. So that's on the first page, and you know, you can go through those, or we can, you know, talk about them. But then we basically took those and we put them into the 4 categories, which is maintain level of services to the intended level of operational excellence, update infrastructure, maintain and enhance distinct character and culture of the village, and maintain strength and financial stability of the village. And so we put those highest priorities and priority objectives into those 4 categories. I think for tonight, it'd be discussion that, did we capture everything? Or do we agree with these highest priorities? And so, if we do, or if we make any changes, we'll bring this back to council for full adoption. And then council will work through these. It's a good document for council to have, or for staff to have, to help budget, and then work through these initiatives. And so it's a good planning tool for us.
Okay, council? Comments, questions?
Yeah, when you say in highest priority objectives, when we say develop Remembrance Park, are we focusing on phases and not doing the whole thing at once?
So I thought a lot of it at that time in February probably depended on whether the bond passed or not.
Okay.
The other factor that's probably comes into play a little bit here would be the grant funding. We are applying for, I'll say $400,000. It's a 50-50 matching grant, so it's $200,000 village, $200,000 from the grant. That'll help supplement it. So depending on our revenues and what we decide, our priorities in the budget process, but likely that the bond did not pass. Likely it's going to be a phased approach if I had to, venture. But obviously you guys are the ones that make that decision, ultimately with budget. So.
Okay, no, I was just thinking about that because as we go into our budget meetings, that's something we'll consider. If there's money, like you just mentioned, the matching grant, I do plan to at least brainstorm with all 5 of us what we want to do with that, what are our options.
If you recall, that estimated cost for Remembrance Park just for the phase 1 was a little over $1 million. So where that $1 million, how we break that up,
Sure.
That's why it's likely going to be a phased approach.
And I know we're going to talk about, with respect to try and generate some revenues for different projects, I know we're going to talk about maybe donations, but with the new council being seated, I want to address the Tequesta Park opportunity again. We still have the Little League situation. They do have interest from 2 other communities that
Can we maybe, I don't know if that's appropriate to talk about that with this topic.
No, I think it is very appropriate because it's right here. Tequesta Park's on the high priority list. Now, the bond didn't pass. We don't know what will happen with the state, but we have an opportunity for a group to come in that's willing to make a significant investment, both in time, materials, and money, to bring that park, which is still wasting assets. Nobody's using those fields, other than lacrosse occasionally. We have an opportunity to consider this, and we've talked about
Frank, if you don't mind, I really think it's more appropriate for agenda item 3, which is the next one. That's because we're talking about open spaces, donations, P3s.
Okay, well, it's on
If
the
you don't mind
highest
waiting.
priority objectives.
I know.
Tequesta Park
I think
there,
it maybe just applies more to agenda item 3, if you don't mind just
All right, that's
holding
fine.
on till that. Anything else not related to Tequesta Park?
I'll just add, things are listed here, might be 2 or 3 bullet points under highest priority or priority and approved. Are those all equally weighted in their category? Meaning, when you look at the infrastructure, we have 2 things, one, underground power lines, and then streets and roads. Are those equally weighted in our minds?
I was under the understanding that the burying of power lines was a continuance to continue looking at it. It wasn't necessarily that we were going to start budgeting for it.
Yeah, I think it's priority in terms of discussion, but you're right. It's not necessarily priority in terms of where we're allocating funding.
That's all I want to get to.
Yeah.
I just want to
Yes.
make sure that's clear.
Yeah.
And this did track with exactly the ranking, that we, agreed to at the last workshop.
And I'm just bringing that one up because
This
our
is
roads are
funding.
already existing,
Yeah.
and I think that should be the priority over the analysis of burying power lines.
So Molly, are you suggesting that maybe we prioritize these based on the points that we allocated to each item so that they appear in an appropriate order?
So the way these are ordered, and Jeremy, please chime in, but, the ranking sheet, they tallied up everyone's
Right.
ratings, and
Right.
then, like, they had 2 were in pink or orange, I don't know, and those are our very highest priority weighted across, the board, and then yellow was the priority, and then everything else was just approved. So that's what we agreed to last meeting. I think this is our time, if we think we want to revisit and reorganize any of these, I think we can definitely do that.
Well, the way I looked at this was, these are bullet points, kind of in a summary format, but to your point, we did approve weightings, and we did have a structure to the prioritization. For example, 8-man shifts was the one that had the highest point total, so I do think there's merit into acknowledging which ones we rated as the most important, because I think in large measure, those were also driven by funding considerations too. So
And
I think that's a good suggestion.
And Jeremy, I mean, you're gonna be focusing on all of these, but you're gonna start with the highest priority. I mean, things ebb and flow. If the opportunity comes up for a priority versus the highest priority, you'll let us know.
Yeah, right. I mean, well, obviously there'll be some budget discussions. We plan on tying our strategic plan to the budget decisions. I mean, so if there's, an item that we left out that was on here, we can, we're gonna have to call that out and say the reason why we didn't fund it is because, Remembrance Park was $1 million, we didn't have that funding, or, something like that. And I don't know that one's it. I'm just using it as an example, but I can go back and make sure that these were in order. So like looking at goal update infrastructure, like the two highest priorities was pursue state funding for Tequesta Park and continue replacement utilities infrastructure. I don't know that Tequesta Park ranked higher than the other one, but I can go back and check and make sure that they're in order of the way that it was ranked. But if I can ask a question for you guys for maybe discussion, but the way that I understood the strategic plan, the pursue state of Florida funding with consideration of match for Tequesta Park was just the staff making that a priority to seek funding for that. I don't think it had anything at the time really tied to, looking for P3s, which, is a tough one anyways, but, so unless I'm wrong, that's the initiative, is to continue to look for funding at the state level, not necessarily to go fund something in the budget to go redo a field. I mean, just to make sure that that's clear. So, unless I'm wrong, but
I don't think you are.
Yeah. Okay, public comment? No? All right, so next step, this will show up on council meeting to formally adopt.
that's right.
All right, thank you. Moving on, agenda item 3, discuss options for future enhancements to open spaces. Jeremy, Mitty, who wants to start this one?
I can lead it off and then turn it over. So prior to the bond hitting the voters, I had multiple people ask me, what are we gonna do if the bond fails? And then since the bond has failed, I've had multiple people ask me, what do we do now? And so I think it was prudent to have this as a discussion item to discuss, where we're at, where we're going. As I've mentioned with the parks, we have applied for, and this is just parks in general, enhancing our parks, enhancing our green space. We do have that grant through FERDAP. We currently have another smaller grant through FERDAP for Constitution Park that will be winding up this year. We're allowed to apply for 2 of those grants, so right now we have 2 of those on the books, Constitution Park and Remembrance Park. We will also look for the Parks and Open Space Florida Forever grant program. That one's big for purchasing land. They did not fund that last year. We hope that it'll be eligible for funding, because I think that'll really mesh well with what our council has wanted to really look for, which is that open space element for us. The other options, for us are donations. We have our policy now that allows for donations specific, either whether playground or whatever specific donation or land. So we have that ability now in our donation policy. And then private-public partnerships, those can be drawn up in so many different ways, but that's obviously up for discussion as well in this conversation. And then, the last one would be, budget considerations. I think Mitty's going to highlight a little bit about what a public-private partnership is and how that may tie into what we're talking about.
Thank you. Good evening. Nice to be with you. Keith sends his apologies. He had something last minute come up, so I appreciate you letting me stand in for him tonight. If I may, Jeremy, I'll start with the donations. That's the second item. So there is no prohibition for either staff or potentially a member of council soliciting donations. From a legal perspective, there are 3 things that need to be met with regard to accepting donations by the village. So first is there needs to be a public purpose. You're going to hear that through much of what I say tonight is going to come back to public purpose. Any donations accepted need to be on behalf of the village, and they need to be used solely for that public purpose. And then obviously to comply with both county and state ethics laws and ordinances. There can't be any kind of quid pro quo or any other kind of consideration given in exchange for the donation. So that certainly is an available option should you seek to go down that path. And then I guess next, the public-private partnerships is a little bit more complicated. The law does allow for such a mechanism. I think the distinction, depending on where you're talking in the village, is with regard to ownership. So the way that the law, and it's a very complicated statute, but to actually enter into the formal agreement, the village either needs to own it or they need to become, that ownership change needs to be relatively imminent. So there needs to be an imminent potential for conveyance. So that would not, it would be a little bit premature on land that's not owned currently by the village to be entertaining a P3, which is how I'll briefly refer to them. But it is an option under the state law. Most typically, P3s are initiated by a private entity. They come to the village. There is an allowance under state law that you can solicit or put out a solicitation for an RFP to undertake a P3. That's the less common way to do it. Typically, somebody comes to the village and says, hey, I have this great potential for partnership. And then you just have to go through the statutory process. But ownership, again, is key. Either way, whether someone approaches the village or whether you put out an RFP, it's a formal solicitation. There's a statutory notice period. So if you get an unsolicited proposal, you then have to put a notice in the Florida Administrative Register and also in the newspaper for 2 consecutive weeks. You have to allow other people potentially interested to provide a proposal to respond as well. That applies to both, whether you get an unsolicited one or whether you put out an RFP yourself. It's certainly a mechanism that can be used, but it is a pretty complicated statutory requirement. But with that, I'll answer any questions as the conversation kind of evolves and give you any detail you need.
Okay, thanks, Betty. Council comment, questions?
So just to clarify, legally, there is a process and that someone just can't come in and say, give me.
So you would, there are two ways it can happen to have a P3. Someone would provide to the village what they call an unsolicited proposal. So someone would provide a written proposal to the village about the desired partnership, the desired project. The other way, the less common way, is that you would actually, the village would put out an RFP and request proposals from potentially interested private entities to, because essentially what you're doing is you're creating a contractual arrangement. At the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You're entering into a contract. So there are two ways to do it. The much more common way is for the village to receive an unsolicited proposal and then put it out to anybody else who's interested.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Councilmember D'Ambra?
So can we talk about Tequesta Park?
Yes.
Obviously, the bond didn't pass. We still basically have, in my opinion, a wasting asset. We have an opportunity with this particular group to come in.
Ask a question quick.
Sure.
Do we own the asset?
We're not talking about public-private partnership,
You said we have a what kind of asset?
a wasting asset.
You're calling it an asset, but is it an asset?
It's an asset in the sense that when we lease it and we have oversight and management responsibility and maintenance responsibility. So Jeremy has talked about the fact that we can put out a request for a proposal to see what groups or entities might be interested, all in favor of that. We have one that is willing, like I said, to make a very specific investment of time, energy, and materials. Oh, I'm sorry. To make an investment of time, energy, and materials in order to set up a little league within Tequesta, which I think would be of tremendous benefit to the community, to the children of this community. But again, possibly there's other interested parties as well. But I think with the uncertainty around funding for Tequesta Park at this point in time, for somebody to come in and make a significant investment and turn those ball fields into fully functional fields and provide an outlet for the children of this community to enjoy the Little League, both boys and girls, I think is something we should entertain. So we've talked about the approach to that would be, again, to see, put out a request for proposal with the idea that we would approve a specific league.
I don't think, so, not to interrupt, but Jeremy, because we went down this road, like, I feel like multiple times at this point, and consensus was we were going to adopt a use agreement, policy use agreement, whatever we called it, which we have adopted, correct? So that is the process to go through for interested parties, and a donation, like you, Mindy, just said, it can't be quid pro. They can't ask for anything in return if they're going to be improving
It's a donation.
the
I think,
parks.
as I understood the use agreement, was that we could still entertain a specific agreement with a specific organization that would then supersede that use agreement. The use agreement would apply to all the other parties that might not be party to that particular agreement for utilization. And I don't think there's any, as I understood it, there was no issue if they wanted to come in and make an arrangement with us, and we were open to it. But we would have to approve the idea of okaying and sponsoring a specific league, and give them that opportunity to have the use of the fields as they need them, which is the only way a league could function properly. But right now, you've got fields over there, they're basically lying dormant. So you can, again, I call it a wasting asset because it's underutilized, it's not being utilized for the purposes for which it was originally designed, and we're, I think, missing out on a significant opportunity that would be of significant benefit to the community. So all I'm saying is, I'd like to put this on, we have a new council coming in, I'd like, there was a consensus but not a vote, and I'd like to put this back on the agenda. I'd like us to vote on this specifically to see if we want to go out and issue an RFP and entertain, again, the idea of a sponsorship opportunity for a specific league. And again, they're willing to make the investment to make these fields usable for the purposes for which they were designed.
So we do have appropriations submitted right now for design for that park to work towards a plan that the community said that they actually wanted. So let's keep that in mind. I don't know if we want to take any action until we see if we're going to get funding for the appropriations we submitted for DeQuesta Park. And Jeremy, just please refresh our memory. The way I remember it is if we want to go down this route, an RFP has to go out and anyone can respond. And it's at our discretion to review those. If multiple people respond, it's our discretion to review those and move forward with one of the parties, but it still doesn't give them full use of the fields, correct?
Well, it depends on how we write the RFQ. We wrote one already. We have a draft of one. But that is, all that's kind of correct, is that, if we wanted to really entertain a league, the next step to be able to do that would do an RFP to do that, and then we would rank them. We'd rank them based on the proposals, and whether it's we form a committee or you council, as the council wants to be that committee, you guys would go through and rank those. Based on those proposals is how we would outline that agreement, whether it was 4 days a week, 5 days a week, whatever that, however we want to structure that, we could do that. None of it is weighted based on how much they're going to contribute or how much they're going to donate, because that's the quid pro quo part. Now, if somebody wins, Joe Blow wins the bid, and then they want to come in there and make some improvements to help with the field and do a donation, they absolutely can, but it won't be contingent upon them winning that RFP. I think that's what you guys were both kind of. I think you guys both kind of dancing around it, but that's the way the process works.
And just so the record is clear, depending on how you issue the solicitation, an RFP would contemplate a price proposal. So just remember, in the RFP context, that's a lowest bidder proposal. An RFQ would be based on qualifications and ability to provide whatever the requested service is.
RFQ.
I just wanted to clarify.
I think I said RFP, but
Yep,
it's RFQ.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, I think the last thing that I remember is that we decided we weren't going to take a vote on that and move forward with that. We'd have a future discussion once the new council was seated, and that's the way that I remember it. So we adopted the field use policy. I think it passed 4-0, and then the next step is when the new council seat, we'd have that discussion. So we can tee that up at a future workshop if that's what you guys want to do.
I prefer to wait till what we see happens with appropriation, and I think if maybe you can let me know if it's appropriate, the new council members who are both here tonight, they could give us their opinion during any of their matters maybe at the next council meeting, or do we have to workshop it to get their opinion?
To get their formal opinion, you would need to workshop it again. Otherwise, there'd be,
But
you could place it
they could say yay or nay if they even want to during any other matters, or no?
on a,
Usually when we add stuff to workshop, it's usually brought up during, it's either something we are talking about on the agenda that we need to do more research, so we punt that to a workshop. Or one of us will bring up a topic during any other matters and we'll kind of say yay or nay if we want to put on a future workshop.
you could do it that way. You could do either. That's fine.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
I mean, since we're on that topic, I think it'd be good to, this Little League group came forward and wanted to do something, and, it'd be great if those fields are used. And so until that project, our funding comes in play, I think an RFQ is appropriate. Just my last moment comments. I think there might be a citizens.
Yep, I have.
So we do
I will take public comment.
have a league out there that's running the fields, and they play on Saturdays right now. That was out there last Saturday, and I saw the game going on, so I talked to Greg, and he's like, yep, they rent the fields out there right now, so we do have a league going on.
Yeah. Ma'am, I'll call you up in just a second, please. Thank you. I had one quick question on donations. So you said staff or council, or there's multiple ways to solicit donations. How do we tackle that? Say we're getting to a point where we're gonna develop Remembrance Park, but maybe there's a feature in Remembrance Park that we don't have the funding for, and maybe we want to, seek donations. How would we do that?
So you could, obviously tonight you can't take any formal action, but if there's consensus to move forward with that, you could, at a regular council meeting, you could vote to delegate either the manager or a council person to kind of be tasked with that initiative to move forward with soliciting donations. But I mean, you could do it any number of ways, but if you want to formally appoint someone, you would need to do that as part of your regular workshop and delegate someone, again, either the manager or one of you all to be the point person.
Okay. All right. Okay, public comment? Can you come up to the podium and state your name and address?
Yes. My name is Susan Valdez. My address is DeQuesta Pines. I've been a resident of DeQuesta for over 30 years. And when you talked about DeQuesta Park, it piqued my interest because that is such a valuable asset, piece of land, property, anything, something that we have access to. But I find the discussion very narrow, only talking about a baseball league. There are so many resources in that park. For instance, a dog park. There is currently a dog park that is underutilized there. If we look at the one in Jupiter, it is crowded, it is full, people are talking about it. Ours is pretty pathetic. There's a path there that people love walking. How often is that kept up? So what I just wanted to do was remind the council that there's a variety of resources at that park, rather than just concentrating on one narrow path as we look forward to enhancing DeQuesta Park. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I agree the dog park could use some improvements. I'll say that again.
And we did have charrettes where we developed a whole plan for DeQuesta Park, but we did charrettes where we developed, where the community developed a whole plan for DeQuesta Park. But the cost of that redevelopment is about $8 million. So when we're talking about the baseball fields, we're talking about an element of it where we have an interest from a group that wants to come in but that doesn't preclude anything else.
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't, we're not narrowly focused just on that only.
All right, any other public comment?
Of course.
Marcia?
Okay, just so I'm clear here, because I've read the state contract to the lawyer. So, because we don't own DeQuesta Park, the state owns DeQuesta Park, we cannot enter into a partnership, is that correct?
Yeah, one of the requirements of state law is that you either own it or there is a potential conveyance and you will own it, you being the village.
Okay.
Correct.
So if you do this RFP, then that is not considered a partnership, is that correct?
I think that's a different item, right? The RFQ that was being discussed was for a different service, not for a public-private partnership.
Okay, so I wanted to be sure on that. You've read the state contract, I assume. Is this something that has to go to the state for approval at some point to make sure that they're good with this?
No, I'm not sure I'm following what you mean by the state contract. The state
Well, the lease.
statute, right, spells out very specifically what you have to do and what formal findings the village has to make before there's either an interim agreement or the final contractual agreement. So the village would have to follow precisely the very complicated and complex state law.
I
to enter
realize
into
that,
one
but
of them.
the actual lease has some verbiage about, and it's been a while since I've reviewed it, some verbiage about this kind of thing. And I just want to be sure we're on solid legal ground. The lease is really simple. It's a very,
I know we've recently updated the maintenance plan, so if you don't mind offline, I think Jeremy can answer all of your questions, because we've recently been doing this with the state,
Okay.
updating everything.
all right, so, just so that we, yeah.
Okay, any other public comment? All right, moving on, next agenda item, last agenda item 4, discussion on council manager form of government legal update and upcoming council reorg. Did Jeremy or Mitty?
So annually, we typically send this out to council. In the past, there've even been some discussion, just put the legal update that legal provides to us on council form of government. Mitty is going to summarize that document and, open the floor for questions. And additionally, I think 2 years ago, we started just make sure we outline the process that is coming up next week for the mayor, vice mayor. And so Mitty will talk about that process so everybody's comfortable when we get to that meeting.
Thanks, Jeremy. So just briefly about the appointment of vice mayor and mayor at your next meeting. Just a reminder, you can, and Keith will remind you at the meeting as well. It typically and very commonly gets confused, but the vice mayor and the mayor position can either be by nomination or by motion. So if it's by nomination, remember that one of you would make a nomination for a certain person. That person would need to accept the nomination. Then you would take from any other council members any other nominations for either the mayor or the vice mayor position. Once all the nominations are on the floor, you vote on them in the order in which they were made. So you kind of go down the list. If the first one succeeds and there's a majority vote, then that person who was nominated first would be either the vice mayor or the mayor. In contrast, doing it by motion is much more like your normal approval of any other item. So it would be a motion that would require a second. Motion to appoint so-and-so as the vice mayor, you'd need a second, and then you would call for a vote and vote on that. That's sort of the two ways you can do it, but again, your charter requires it to be done at your next meeting, so it'll be on the agenda at your next meeting. As Jeremy said, the other document that you see every year is the legal update from us. Nothing significant in terms of changes. Obviously, you all are aware of sunshine. All the sunshine prohibitions still apply. The council members-elect have been provided a more thorough update from Keith, so they're hearing this a little bit duplicatively, but remember that you can't be talking to each other about items that are reasonably foreseeable to come before you, other than at a public meeting. Public records, the same thing applies. Be sensitive. It seems like in recent years, the more common way to get tripped up by public records was through text messaging. Social media is now the much more prominent use, so just be sensitive if you're using your own personal social media accounts. You are the retention for that platform. If you're not using a village platform, you're subject to the same requirements in terms of retention. You have to be able to reproduce those records if they're requested by anybody, so just keep that in mind as social media has become much more prominent. The only other thing to flag for you that's currently, again, in bill form, it was in bill form last year, is that potential change to the financial disclosures. That's back in the legislature, so we'll see what happens this year. But that would subject you all to the much more transparent, I'll say, financial disclosures. Then you're currently doing Form 1, you'd be subject to Form 6, so it would be a bigger lift. But again, we'll see if that goes through this year. It is getting some traction, so and it is the second year, so that's usually not a good thing. nothing has changed in terms of gifts. Remember, you have to do your mandatory ethics training, still applies. If you need more information on that, we can certainly provide it, but I'm happy to answer any questions if you have anything on Sunshine or public records or anything in the memo, and you can always feel free to reach out. Our main goal is to deal with anything that's in this memo before it actually happens, so we can make sure you do the right thing rather than trying to correct things on the back end. So call Keith or I anytime, and we're happy to discuss.
You guys have done a good job of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thanks, May.
Yeah.
All right, open up for council discussion. I know historically we usually use this time for any sitting council members to express any interest on mayor, vice mayor.
I had a question
Roll.
actually about the document before we move forward, if you don't mind, Mayor.
No?
So on page 5, you mentioned lobbying and lobbyist. Can we clarify who counts as a lobbyist? Is it an actual lobbyist that goes to Tallahassee, or is it like a developer coming in and works for them?
It's very specific, so let me call and give you the exact,
Okay.
yeah, it's very specific.
Or maybe we
in
can
terms
send a
of-
memo to all the council members, so that way we're all
Sure.
very careful of who we're talking to with people coming into the village with that target on our back for redevelopment and trying to get their foot in the door. Just make sure we're all being transparent about that.
Sure.
And the other thing is for even incoming council members, and I think I say it every year, we are supposed to disclose ex parte communications, whether it was a lunch with someone and they are standing in front of us trying to get a vote from us, or if you had a phone call or a text, any kind of communication needs to be disclosed. I just remind everyone that because sometimes they feel like maybe they're not being disclosed. And that is it. Thank you, Mayor.
And that's a good point, and if I may just add one more comment to the ex parte disclosures, one that's commonly overlooked is if you go do a site visit, that also needs to be disclosed. That is one that people tend to forget or overlook.
And kind of additional question on that, you know, some of these, especially when development applications, site plan, they drag out because we have a conceptual plan, maybe have another conceptual plan. I mean, you need to go back to even discussions during conceptual plan, pre-conceptual plan, the whole entire process, correct?
So a conceptual plan, that gets a little bit nuanced because you don't at that time know that it's going to be coming before you, but I would say that you should always err on the side of caution. It's better to over-disclose than to not disclose and need to have disclosed because it's prejudicial if you don't disclose. So the way I think about it and the way I advise all of our cities is if you question the need to disclose it because you have a good instinct and you have a good gut. So if you think, wait a minute, what would the lawyer tell me? Go ahead and put it on the record and get it out there. Because it's better to have over disclosed.
Okay, thank you.
And there's nothing illegal to have those site visits or meetings or anything like
No.
that, as long as you just disclose it.
It's only problematic if you do not disclose that you had them, because then it's prejudicial against the applicant depending on how your vote is on whatever the development application item is.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the legal update? Okay, I'll open up the conversation for reorg. Councilmember Brandon, anyone? Councilmember Deambra?
Well, I'm always happy to serve in whatever capacity the council wishes. So whether it's a contributing council member, vice mayor, mayor, at the end of the day, we all have one vote. So no one's vote counts more than any other. So in that sense, we're all equal, and we're all equal contributors in the process and to the decision making. So again, whatever role my fellow council members want me to fulfill, that I'm very happy to do that.
Yep, I agree. I think we are a team of 5, absolutely. I think our residents need to hold all 5, whoever sit up here, that strong and keep check on everybody. Again, I've been up here and it's been such a pleasure to be the good voice, the not so good voice sometimes, being that devil's advocate sometimes, voting no sometimes when I'm outnumbered, that's okay. I do like the idea, and I know other municipalities are attempting to go down this route too, not having a mayor, let's say, for 10 years. So I do think it'd be healthy if we rotated like 1 or 2 years of a mayor or vice mayor and just keep it fresh and making sure everyone rotates, because it is an equal council of 5. And I think it would just be good so we don't get stuck in that rut again.
Okay, Councilmember Vice Stone, I know you had some comments last meeting.
I
Anything
did.
else to add?
Yeah, so, local government is so special, and And we live in a very special little community, and everyone that I've seen up here has the ability to be in any position, whether it's mayor, vice mayor, or regular council member. And I think there's strength in having the different experiences and in sharing it, and I think there's value in making it a stronger council. So I did mention that last meeting that I did think it's good to continue to change the leadership within any organization, especially local politics, local government. So I agree. I think one of the three of you should be mayor, and I think that would be, and I think one of the three of you should be vice mayor. I think because of the experience and the two additional gentlemen coming on, we'll get that experience over those years. And so I encourage it to switch it. And I know you were mayor a year ago, you're a mayor this year, and so naturally I think Councilwoman Brandon would be an excellent mayor, and I think that would be a good opportunity to strengthen this board. I will also say that the residents vote, or we get appointed, or whatever the process is that someone doesn't run against an individual. But the residents ultimately are the people that we respond to. And then as a council member, we talk and we speak and we communicate and we agree, disagree. But at the end of the day, whatever is decided by this council, as a whole, we move forward with supporting it. And I was speaking frankly, Mayor, I was shocked the other day when the last council meeting, we all agreed through a vote to support, I think it was Indian Creek, to move forward in setting up their own organization. But you refused to sign that letter. And to me, I have a problem with that in that aspect, because it's more of you seeing yourself better than the decision of the council in representing the council.
I don't think you should put words in my mouth, and I think that we should all respect each other's votes up here. I don't think I've ever questioned or come at anyone up here for the way they vote on something. I was very clear on my reasoning. I had didn't have enough backup, didn't have enough data, and I wasn't comfortable
Fair
voting
enough,
on that.
but as mayor, and even looking at, I believe our charter talks about having to represent what the council ultimately decides, and you decided not to sign that document, and I have a problem with that. That's just me. I'm not putting any words in your mouth. I'm saying my words are, I have a problem where the council votes, moves forward, and you decide not to move forward in the collective decision that the council has made. So that's just me. And so I have an issue with that.
Okay.
But I'm going off, and so that's me. But if you wanted to clarify that,
I just did.
okay, fair enough. So my hope is that you make a motion for Lori to be married next week. That's my hope, but that's where I fit.
Do you mind if I say one last thing, Mayor? Just for the record, I do think that Mrs. Molly Young has done a great job at leading our meetings. That is one of the roles of the mayor, is to run the meeting and make sure they're efficient and make sure that everyone's getting fair time and everyone gets to express their opinion, because we all do talk to different residents and we do all vote differently. Sometimes it's 1 against 4, and that's okay. I know my name was thrown out last time. For future council members and current sitting council, if it helps you, rest assured, I think we all know our families are very much involved, and I have discussed any kind of possibility, whether it was first chair or second chair. My family is supportive, and certain schedules could be rearranged. My kids are older, they're not exactly toddlers anymore, so we are a little more efficient, if that helps anybody figure out the plan for our leadership. I do like us having representation at our meetings, and we have reorganization coming as well with different committees. And I do very much encourage our new council members coming in to try and get on some of those to help divvy up some of the responsibilities. It's very much helpful. And be very honest with your schedules, because I know we all have different schedules. Some are better in the morning, some are better in the evening. I think that makes us a very strong team if we can all work together and make sure that the village is represented on a wide spread. Thank you.
Okay, I will say it's been an absolute honor serving as mayor this past year. And you know, it's it is a lot more work in that position. Not only are you running the meetings, but you're also dealing with, building relations within the community here, but then there's a lot that goes into relations with other stakeholders throughout the county. So, and I worked very hard at that, and it was really my honor to do it. And I would be happy to serve as mayor, vice mayor, or council member at, whatever the council's pleasure is next week. All right. Any public comment? Nope. All right. Can I get a motion?
Motion.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Happy Easter, everybody. Have a beautiful day. I hope it's gonna be gorgeous out. And we have tons of bunnies running around the village. On a happy note.
That's for
Literally,
sure.
there's bunnies everywhere.
Thank you.
I'll second.
I made the motion. It was quick, but I made it.
Yeah.
All in favor? Aye.
We don't technically,
Motion.
you don't
Motion
technically
to
have to
dismiss.
motion, but Frank did.
Yeah.
Aye.
You don't technically need a motion, adjournment. I remember the first time I didn't, everyone yelled at me, so. Like, okay,
I think traditionally,
you do.
I think you're right, but traditionally, we've always,
I know, that's why I was like, okay.
it goes back 30 years, so it's,
Thank you, Mitty.
God, it's quite
Nice to
so
see you, yeah.
fun. We live over there. I take my dog out at walks at like 10 o'clock at night. Well, he hasn't got any because I don't let him, but we judge our walks on how many bunnies we saw that night.
That's how I know the coyotes are.
Wait, the coyotes come back.
So five,
I missed the past two general.
I actually missed the last